The chandeliers above the courtroom flickered against the winter sun, casting trembling light across the polished mahogany benches. The hush was unnatural, thick with judgment and hushed disbelief. Elena Moore stood near the defendant's table, her hands gently wrapped around a worn leather notebook, the edges softened by time. Her beige coat clung to her shoulders like armor, though nothing in her posture claimed strength. She looked like she didn't belong. And that was exactly what they wanted her to feel. A rustle passed through the gallery as Judge Harold Bennett entered, his robe billowing like a storm cloud. His gaze swept over the room, until it landed on her, this quiet woman who had dared to represent herself. He arched a brow, leaned slightly forward, and spoke with a voice that rolled like thunder over marble floors. "Miss Moore, we are here at your request. You claimed misconduct on the part of the court staff and requested an emergency review hearing. Do you understand the seriousness of that accusation?" Elena gave a single nod. Her voice didn't rise. She said nothing. Just a quiet breath and a stillness that felt out of place in a room built for conflict. The judge's lips twisted into a tight, thin smile. "You're not a lawyer, are you?" A soft chuckle came from the first row of attorneys behind her. One leaned toward the other. "She won't last 5 minutes." Elena's fingers pressed into the spine of her notebook, but her face didn't change. A tremor, nearly invisible, touched her lower lip. Judge Bennett leaned back. "Let me ask again, on the record. Are you an attorney, Miss Moore?" She raised her chin slightly, her eyes locking with his. "Not currently practicing." The words fell into the courtroom like a stone into still water. Ripples of laughter and smug disbelief followed. One of the junior clerks turned his head, pretending not to smile. The judge allowed the moment to stretch, long, humiliating, deliberate. He turned to the gallery. "This, ladies and gentlemen, is what happens when daytime television inspires people to act above their station." A man in the gallery laughed. Elena didn't blink. Her gaze stayed forward, but something behind her eyes shifted, just a flicker. As if someone had lit a match behind a wall of glass. The judge continued, now fully leaning into his performance. "You bring no representation, no formal motion, no legal citations, only a claim, written by hand, in a notebook better suited for grocery lists. And yet, we entertain this curiosity." He looked back at her, eyes narrowed. "Proceed, Miss Moore. If you still wish to embarrass yourself." Elena stepped forward. Her heels made no sound on the waxed floor, but the temperature in the room dropped. She reached for her notebook again and laid it open on the desk. A photograph slipped out and landed on the floor beside her boot. A girl in a blue dress, smiling on courthouse steps. The image had been folded and unfolded many times, creases like veins across its surface. She bent to pick it up slowly. The judge let out a theatrical sigh. "We're not here for sentiment, Miss Moore. You have the floor. Say something. Anything." She didn't move right away. Then her lips parted. But before she could speak, the courtroom doors creaked open. A woman in a sharp black suit stepped in, paused, then found her place quietly in the back row. She wore no badge, but the way she scanned the room said she didn't need one. No one else seemed to notice. The focus remained on the silent woman standing alone at the front. Judge Bennett tapped his gavel once, not with force, just enough to claim superiority. "Let the record show that the claimant appears unprepared and unqualified to proceed." He leaned forward, voice dropping slightly. "Unless you plan to surprise us all, Miss Moore." There was sarcasm in the way he said her name. It curled at the edges like smoke. She finally spoke, quiet but clear. "I do." The judge blinked. "You do, what?" She looked up. Her eyes didn't waver. "Plan to surprise you." Another murmur rose. More laughter. One of the clerks shook his head. But behind her, the woman in the black suit tilted her head, watching more intently now. Elena reached into her notebook. Not for another photo, not for a document, but for a slip of paper folded 3 times. She placed it face down on the desk. Judge Bennett didn't bother looking at it. You don't get to introduce new evidence mid-hearing. She met his gaze. You asked for something. This is it. He leaned over, annoyed. With 2 fingers, he flipped it over, just to dismiss it. Then he froze. His eyes scanned the page once. Twice. He picked it up with his full hand now, brought it closer. Something in his jaw tightened. Behind him, the woman in the black suit slowly rose. But the room hadn't seen it yet. The gallery still thought they were watching a spectacle, a powerless woman grasping at scraps of justice. They didn't know, she wasn't just a quiet woman. The moment he saw the paper, something cracked behind Judge Bennett's carefully practiced expression. But he folded the paper again, as if by doing so, he could fold the truth with it. The audience didn't notice. Their laughter was already fading, uncertain. Elena returned the notebook to her chest and stepped back, not in defeat, but in memory. Because long before this courtroom, long before the humiliation, there had been another silence. A colder one. It was autumn. The leaves outside the city courthouse where she once clerked burned orange and gold in the low sun. She used to sit beside her mentor, Ava Richardson, a woman whose voice could command judges and calm riots. Elena, then still Elena Gray, was the rising star of the legal world. Her suits crisp, her briefcase full of victories. She believed law could protect people, believed it could fix the world if you just worked hard enough. Then came the night her mother's voice cracked over the phone, trembling as she explained the foreclosure. Her father had passed 6 months before. The hospital bills drowned them. No attorney answered her calls, not even the firm Elena had helped win a federal case for the month before. She begged her own office to take the case. They smiled and said it wasn't their demographic. That week, Elena stopped wearing name-brand heels. That month, she resigned. And by winter, she stopped being a lawyer. The notebook she now held wasn't just filled with scribbles. It carried every promise she had broken to herself, every injustice she hadn't been able to stop. On its 3rd page, taped gently, was a news clipping. Judge Harold Bennett dismisses fraud allegation after plaintiff misses filing window. That plaintiff had been her mother. Elena never forgot that smirk. That gavel. That silence. Years passed. She worked part-time in archives, taught GED classes at night. The law never left her, but she no longer stood inside it. Only outside, watching. Like a ghost haunting her own dream. But a month ago, something shifted. At the community library where she volunteered, a young girl, Asha, came crying into the reading room. Her mother, a janitor at the courthouse, had been fired after reporting mistreatment. No lawyer would touch it. Too small. Too poor. Too unclear. Asha asked Elena if she could help. That night, Elena opened her old file box. Her bar card had expired. But not her memory. She spent days outside the courthouse, in the cold, writing by hand. Watching. Listening. And that's when she saw him, Bennett, berating a young man representing himself, humiliating him for mispronouncing a legal term. The gavel hadn't changed. But Elena had. She filed the emergency motion in her own name. She knew the system wouldn't take her seriously. That's what she wanted. Because buried in the statute, page 37 of the courthouse code, was a loophole Bennett himself had written a decade ago to protect his own reputation. She knew that because she'd typed the original draft when she was still Elena Gray. And now, in this grand courtroom where oil paintings watched from above and justice was measured by suits and surnames, she stood not as a woman begging to be heard, but as a reckoning. Still, doubt lingered. Not about the case, but about herself. That soft, cruel voice that lived inside her whispered even now, You walked away. You didn't fight back then. What makes you think you belong here now? Her hand trembled slightly as she held the notebook again. Behind her, she heard someone shifting. Not the judge. Not the crowd. It was the woman in the black suit, the one who had entered quietly. Elena didn't know her. But something in the woman's eyes, earlier, had mirrored her own. Loss. Purpose. Control. The clerk's cough jolted her back to the present. The judge was speaking again, but his voice had lost its power. She didn't need to hear the words. She could see the uncertainty in his shoulders now, the calculation beginning. He was wondering what she knew. How much she had uncovered. Whether his name would be in her notebook. The courtroom was still breathing, still watching. But for Elena, it blurred. All she could see was the day she stood outside her mother's old house, boarded up and cold, after everything was taken. She had whispered then, "I'll come back. I promise." And for years, she hadn't. Not until now. This wasn't just a hearing. It was the moment she broke the silence she had once chosen. And somewhere deep within, a younger version of herself, the Elena who had believed, who had fought, took her hand again. She looked up. Judge Bennett had finished his statement, whatever it was. He leaned back, falsely relaxed, but his fingers tapped restlessly against the bench. The clerk looked at her, uncertain now. Maybe even curious. And that woman in black was still standing. Elena stepped forward again, just one small step, and opened the notebook once more. Her voice hadn't come yet. But it would. The silence she carried was no longer shame. It was power, waiting to be released. And the courtroom had no idea that the woman they tried to dismiss, had once written the laws they used to judge her. The courtroom lights cast a faint halo around Elena as she stood before them, still silent, still unread. The leather-bound notebook rested like a relic on the desk, its cover worn smooth by years of silent purpose. And yet, no one in the gallery truly looked at it. They were too busy trying to understand who she was. In the back row, the woman in the black suit remained on her feet. Her expression was still, but her gaze never left Elena. She tilted her head slightly, then narrowed her eyes as if reaching for a memory buried just beyond recognition. A name. A moment. Something. She leaned over to whisper to the man seated beside her, a younger associate with a digital tablet balanced on his lap. "Pull up court archives," she murmured. "Search for Elena Moore. And Gray. Cross-reference legal clerkship under both." The man looked surprised but obeyed instantly. Meanwhile, the clerk at the front of the courtroom, Daniel, stole a second glance at Elena. He hadn't intended to. But something about the way she held the notebook, the quiet focus in her eyes, unsettled him. Earlier, he had thought her timid. Powerless. Now, he wasn't sure. He looked again at the paper Judge Bennett had read. He had caught only a glimpse of the letterhead. But the emblem had looked old. State level. Internal Audit Division. Daniel's breath caught for a moment. Had she brought state oversight into this courtroom without them realizing? He shifted uncomfortably. On the bench, Judge Bennett continued his performance. "You may proceed, Miss Moore. If you have anything substantive to offer." His voice had changed. Slightly softer. Not out of kindness, but calculation. He had seen the emblem too. He just hoped no one else had. Elena's hand rested gently on the open notebook. She hadn't yet spoken since her last statement. But she didn't need to. The power of her silence had shifted from invisibility to unease. The room was beginning to feel it. Across the aisle, a woman in a blue sweater leaned over and whispered to her husband. "She looks familiar," she said. "I think I saw her years ago, in the news." He shook his head. Probably just another activist. But the wife frowned. "No. There was a case. With a judge. I think she was involved. Behind them, a soft chime rang out from the associate's tablet. The woman in the black suit took it, eyes scanning rapidly. Her jaw clenched. She knew now. Elena Gray. Former legal advisor. Once assigned to judicial oversight for the state of New York. Resigned suddenly. No public statement. But in quiet corners of the law, people remembered the firestorm that followed. Several judges were investigated for improper conduct. One quietly retired. One committed suicide. And one, Harold Bennett, was quietly moved to a different jurisdiction. The woman's voice, calm but razor-sharp, cut through the silence. "Your Honor, may I approach?" The entire room turned. Judge Bennett's eyes flashed with something colder than rage. Recognition. He cleared his throat. "I don't believe that's appropriate. The gallery is not part of these proceedings." But the woman in the black suit was already walking. She handed a sealed document to the bailiff, who took it without hesitation. The judge's voice rose, brittle. "On what grounds do you interrupt court protocol?" The woman didn't look at him. Her eyes remained on Elena. She spoke gently. "We're here as observers from judicial affairs. It seems, we may have overlooked something. Or someone." The whisper spread through the courtroom like wine through dry leaves. Judicial affairs. Suddenly, everyone looked again at Elena. Not as a quiet woman. Not as someone fumbling through legal terms. But as someone with history. The judge tried to reassert control. "Miss Moore has presented no credentials. Her motion is not formalized. I see no reason to allow further delay." But his voice trembled. Slightly. And Elena finally raised her hand. "Your Honor," she said, calm and clear, "may I submit Exhibit A to the court?" The bailiff approached. Elena reached into her notebook and pulled out a small envelope sealed with the original ink stamp of the Office of Legal Oversight. She handed it over, then looked straight at the judge. "You might recognize the format," she said. "You wrote the template yourself." A gasp, barely audible, came from someone in the front row. The clerk, Daniel, looked down at the docket. He scrolled back 5 years. Found a case. A signature. E. Gray. His head shot up. He looked again at Elena. Then at the judge. And something in his chest twisted. He remembered that case now. He had just started at the courthouse. Young. Naive. He remembered the look in Elena's eyes when she left the courtroom back then. The same quiet. The same fire. He hadn't realized what he was seeing then. Now he did. In the gallery, the woman in black returned to her seat. But not before looking once more at Elena. This time, not with suspicion, but with recognition. And respect. The courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. It was watching. Waiting. The pieces were falling into place. But they still didn't see the full picture. Not yet. Because Elena Moore had one more card to play. And when it came, it would change everything. The bailiff placed the sealed envelope on the judge's bench, its red ink seal gleaming under the courtroom lights. Judge Bennett stared at it but didn't touch it. His fingers hovered above the document as if it might burn him. The courtroom held its breath. No one moved. Elena didn't speak. She didn't need to. The seal said enough. He cleared his throat, forcing a smile. This is irregular. But the words sounded brittle. Hollow. Even the walls seemed to echo them with a shrug. He opened the envelope. As his eyes skimmed the document inside, the blood drained from his face. The confidence, the sarcasm, the contempt, all vanished in a single breath. He blinked. Then again. His lips parted, but no words came. The document was a certified summary of judicial ethics complaints filed under an anonymous code years ago, complaints that had triggered a quiet investigation, one that nearly cost him his seat. He had spent months erasing those shadows. And now, the author of that complaint stood before him. Not as a bystander, but as the one he thought he'd silenced. Elena stepped forward slowly. Her voice didn't rise, but it filled the room. Your Honor, you dismissed my case once before. You called it lacking merit. You said the evidence was anecdotal. You said I was emotional. And maybe I was. She reached into her notebook and pulled out another page, torn, crumpled, but carefully unfolded. But now, that complaint has been reviewed by the Office of Legal Oversight. And this time, I brought everything. The judge tried to interject, but his voice cracked. I remind you, this is not an official. You wrote the procedural manual, Elena said softly. Section 4. Subsection C. Any court officer accused of procedural misconduct is required to step down pending external inquiry. She let the words hang in the air. You signed it into law. Now every eye was on him. The woman in the black suit rose again. She's right. The gallery erupted in hushed chaos, murmurs, gasps, people leaning into one another as realization spread. Daniel, the young clerk, stood from his chair. His face pale. He stepped forward and placed the original docket of Elena's prior complaint onto the bench, next to the document the judge had just read. I found the matching signature, he said, barely audible. It's hers. Elena Gray. Someone whispered, she changed her name. Another added, she was a state legal advisor. The judge's gavel struck hard, desperate now. This is my courtroom, he snapped. And I will not. But the woman in black cut him off. Calm. Precise. Not anymore. Silence. Complete. A gavel couldn't fix what had just cracked. Elena stepped forward again. Not in anger. Not in pride. But with grace. She placed the photograph from earlier, of the little girl on courthouse steps, onto the bench. That was my sister. She wanted to be a judge. She turned to the gallery. Her voice trembled just once. She watched me walk into this courthouse 10 years ago, believing I would change something. That the system worked if you were brave enough. She died in an accident 2 years ago. I never told her I gave up. She faced the judge once more. But I'm here now. And I'm not leaving until this record shows the truth. Judge Bennett couldn't speak. His hand gripped the edge of the bench. For the first time in years, he looked like a man cornered, not by politics, not by protest, but by a ghost of his own design. A shadow passed over his face. Then he slowly sank back into his chair. The courtroom, so full of noise earlier, fell into sacred silence. Elena nodded once to the bailiff. Then she looked at the gallery. At the clerk. At the woman in the black suit. And finally, at herself. In that moment, she wasn't a witness. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't even a lawyer. She was justice, quiet, steady, unbreakable. And as the courtroom doors opened again to admit oversight officers, Elena stood still, the storm now behind her, her notebook closed. Because the world now knew. She was not just a quiet woman. She was the reason the system would have to remember its conscience. Judge Bennett sat frozen, his hand still gripping the bench as if it might anchor him to a reality slipping from his grasp. The oversight officers stepped forward quietly, respectfully, but with authority that overpowered even his towering robe and decades of courtroom presence. Their polished shoes echoed on the stone floor as they approached the bench. One officer held out a folded paper. We'll be relieving you of proceedings until further notice. The judge didn't answer. His fingers slowly released the edge of the bench, and for the first time in a long career of domination and disdain, Harold Bennett looked small. Deflated. He nodded, once. Not in understanding, but resignation. He stood up slowly, as though the robe now weighed more than he could carry. As he descended the steps from the bench, the courtroom didn't erupt. It didn't clap or shout. The silence remained, thick, heavy, and whole. Because they knew they hadn't witnessed a scandal. They'd witnessed a reckoning. Elena didn't look at him. Not to gloat. Not to sneer. She didn't need to. Her justice wasn't about spectacle. It was never about destroying him. It was about remembering who she was. And honoring the people who had been silenced long before her. As Judge Bennett passed, he paused beside her. For a heartbeat. His mouth opened slightly, as if he might say something. A justification. A defense. Maybe even an apology. But no words came. He simply looked into her eyes, and what he saw there undid him more than any gavel or sentence ever could. He looked away. Then he walked out of his own courtroom without a title. Daniel, the young clerk, swallowed hard. He had served under Judge Bennett for 2 years. He had admired him once. Even defended his harshness as discipline. But now, he couldn't unsee what had always been hidden beneath. He stepped forward, standing beside Elena. His voice was soft. You didn't have to come back. Elena looked ahead. Her voice just as quiet. I did. In the gallery, people began to rise. Slowly. Not to leave, but as if in silent respect. The woman in the blue sweater wiped a tear from her cheek. The man beside her placed a hand on her shoulder. The woman in the black suit approached Elena. I remember your name now, she said. Elena nodded. I know. You could have come back louder, the woman added. You had enough to bury him. Elena tilted her head. But then I'd become him. The woman smiled softly. You've done more here with silence than most do with noise. She extended her hand. Elena hesitated, then took it. Not as equals in power, but in understanding. Asha, the little girl whose mother had lost her job, waited near the exit with her mother, wide-eyed. She had clutched Elena's hand only 2 weeks ago, asking if anyone would listen. Now, she watched Elena walk down the aisle as the courtroom slowly cleared. She did it, Asha whispered. Her mother nodded, her voice breaking. No. She remembered us. As Elena neared the door, Daniel called out. Ms. Gray. She paused. He held out her notebook, gently. You left this. She took it, her fingers brushing his. You read it? She asked. Just the beginning, he admitted. And, the end. She offered a small smile. That's enough. Then she turned to the empty courtroom one last time. Where just hours ago, she had stood invisible. Dismissed. Alone. And now, not because she shouted, but because she stood, everything had changed. Outside, the winter sun was beginning to set, casting long golden shafts of light across the marble floor. Elena stepped into it, and for the first time in years, she didn't look over her shoulder. She had come here to speak not only for herself, but for every voice that had ever been silenced, laughed at, or cast aside. And though no one clapped, though no music played, justice had never sounded so full. The courthouse steps were still cold beneath her shoes as Elena paused halfway down, notebook in hand, breath misting softly in the winter air. The noise inside had quieted, the chaos folded into reports and whispers, but out here, everything felt still. The wind tugged gently at her coat. It felt different now, less like armor. More like wings. She hadn't come to be thanked. She hadn't come to reclaim anything. She had come to let go. And somehow, in the act of standing tall, she had made space for that. The doors behind her opened slowly, and a smaller set of footsteps hurried to catch up. Asha, bundled in a red scarf too big for her, held something out with both hands. A paper flower. Crumpled. Colored with bright orange and green crayon. "I made it for you," she said. "Because you helped my mom. And, because you didn't yell." Elena crouched, taking the flower carefully, as if it were made of glass. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than you know." Asha smiled. Then leaned in. "You're like a story," she said. "Like in books. Quiet at first. But then, powerful." Elena blinked hard against the sudden wetness in her eyes. Asha ran back to her mother, who waited with quiet pride near the sidewalk. The two walked away hand in hand, the way Elena and her sister once had, years ago, when life still felt like it could be made fair if you believed in it hard enough. She stood again, turning to look at the courthouse behind her. That building had once taken everything from her. Her faith. Her fire. Her name. But it hadn't taken her forever. She could feel the old weight beginning to lift, not all at once, but like ice cracking under sunlight. She didn't need to win headlines. She needed to forgive herself. The woman in the black suit stepped out next, her coat buttoned, her expression more human now than formal. "You could return," she said. "We'd clear the paperwork. You'd have support. You wouldn't have to stand alone anymore." Elena looked at her, eyes kind. "Maybe one day. But not yet." The woman nodded. "If you change your mind, the door's open." Elena smiled faintly. "This time, I'll knock." They exchanged no further words. They didn't need to. Shared battles often leave behind a quiet understanding no language can improve. Daniel stood by the entrance, still watching her. A young man who had watched a system tilt and realign in a single afternoon. He stepped forward. "I've been studying law," he said quietly. "But sometimes it feels like, we're just pretending to care." Elena turned to him fully, the wind brushing a lock of hair across her cheek. "We're not pretending. We just forget why we started." He swallowed. "You remembered." She nodded. "I had to lose everything to remember." He held out her notebook again, though she already had it in her hands. "Can I ask, why you kept it all these years?" Elena looked down at the notebook. Her thumb traced the cover's edge. "It reminded me who I was before I gave up." She didn't explain more. Some stories don't need full telling. Some truths are too personal to share with the world, yet too important not to carry. She stepped toward the gate, where a silver tram waited by the sidewalk. The city moved slowly around her, unaware of what had just shifted inside its oldest courtroom. She looked up at the sky, soft blue now fading into violet. Her sister's laugh echoed briefly in her mind. "I'll come back. I promise." And now, she finally had. Not as a lawyer. Not even as a witness. But as herself. She boarded the tram and took the seat by the window. As it pulled away, the courthouse shrank in the distance, but something inside her expanded. She hadn't just changed the outcome of a hearing. She had rewritten the ending of a story once abandoned. And planted something in its place. A paper flower. A little girl's smile. A young man's awakening. The quiet legacy of choosing dignity over noise. And justice over applause. The tram hummed gently along its track, weaving through the city's fading gold light as Elena sat near the window, the notebook resting quietly on her lap. The paper flower Asha had given her peeked from its pages. She hadn't opened the notebook since she left the courthouse. Not because she was finished with it, but because, for the first time in years, she no longer needed it to remember who she was. As the tram curved past a bookstore on 5th and Leland, her reflection in the glass layered with the rows of books behind it, pages, faces, memories all folding into one. The stoplight turned amber, then red. The tram eased to a halt. At the bench outside, a girl sat alone. Maybe 11. Blue hoodie. Mismatched socks. Her backpack rested beside her like a secret she didn't want to carry. Elena didn't know what pulled her to press the stop button. She just knew the girl's posture, too small for the burden she bore, too quiet for the noise inside her head. She stepped off the tram, the city air a little colder now. The girl didn't look up. "Is someone coming for you?" Elena asked gently. The girl nodded. Then hesitated. "Maybe." Elena sat beside her. "I was in a courtroom today," she said, not expecting a response. "There was a time I thought I'd never walk back in there again." The girl tilted her head slightly. "Were you on trial?" "No," Elena said. "I was remembering." The girl looked down at her shoes. "My mom's in trouble." She said not to wait inside. That someone might follow. Elena nodded slowly. Her eyes traced the buildings, the glass, the cameras on street corners. The same city that once turned its back on her was now watching from every angle. "Do you want to talk about it?" The girl shook her head. Elena didn't press. Instead, she opened her notebook. Not to read it, but to tear a page free. She wrote her number. Folded it once. Then paused. She added something else. A name. Not Elena Moore. Not Elena Gray. Just E.G., the way she used to sign legal memos when she was still fearless. She held it out. "If you need someone who listens, without judgment, you can call." The girl hesitated. Then took it. Her fingers brushed the crayon petals sticking out of the notebook. "You draw flowers?" the girl asked. Elena smiled softly. "A little girl gave that to me today. She said I was like a story." The girl didn't answer. But she placed the folded paper inside her hoodie and zipped it tight, like a secret she intended to keep safe. As the tram bell rang again, Elena stood. She turned, but the girl spoke, voice barely audible. "Do you think people like us can ever fix what's broken?" Elena didn't turn around. She just looked up. At the courthouse spire rising in the far-off skyline, silhouetted against the bruised sky. "I don't know," she said. "But I know we remember. And sometimes, remembering is how healing begins." As the tram pulled away once more, the city lights flickered on, one by one, like stars waking up in reverse. Inside the courthouse, hours later, a junior file clerk stumbled upon an old case note misfiled decades ago. It had been tucked behind the lining of a drawer, marked only with initials, E.G. Attached to it was a handwritten summary, a roadmap of misconduct spanning years, with footnotes in perfect script and 3 names circled in red ink. One had already resigned. One was under review. And the third. He was just elected to the State Judiciary Board. The clerk brought it to the Oversight Division first thing Monday. It would spark a full reopening of internal judicial investigations statewide. None of them knew who E.G. was. Only that whoever they were, they'd never forgotten.